Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be setting up our little game that we're going to be able to play. Now, this isn't going to be anything too complicated. This is just going to be a little simple platformer where we can have our players running around. So, if we go over to our game scene, this is what's going to load in when we click on the Start Game button in the lobby. This is the scene we are going to transition to. Now, to begin, we are just going to be setting up a basic little environment for our players to run around in. So to start, I'm going to create a camera 2D node, and this is going to be basically what we are going to render. I'm going to set the zoom to be 5 because we're going to have it pretty zoomed in because our tiles are going to be pretty small. And then what we're going to do is create ourselves a tile map. So this tile map is going to basically be looking at this tile map right here, which I have imported at the start of the course. Feel free to use your own if you wish. So for this, we are going to create a new tile map layer node. And then on this tile map layer in the inspector, we're going to create a new tile set. And this tile set, if we go down, well, first of all, we need to open up the tile set by clicking on it and changing the tile size to be 8 by 8. Okay, we are working with 8 by 8 pixels. If you're working with 16, 32, 64, just change those respectively. Okay. Then what we're going to do is go over to our tile set at the bottom and drag in that tile map image. We're then going to click yes. And if we move this up and zoom in, you can see that the tiles are not properly aligned. And that is because we have a 1 pixel padding between them. So over here with separation, I'm going to set that to be 1. And there we go. All our tiles are now equally separated and cut up as they should be. Now the next step is going to be painting in our tile map. So if we go over to the tile map tab here, we can go ahead, we can then, for example, like select tile and then paint it in. It's going to be a bit hard because the background is also gray. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go to where we have our background.png here and drag that into our scene. I'm then going to set the ordering to be -99 just so it appears right at the back of everything. And then we can select the tile map layer again and begin painting this in. So basically, I just want you to go through now and paint out your level. Okay, and there we go. Now, one thing you may notice is that our textures are blurry, and that is because by default, Godot's rendering for textures is to smooth out the pixels. But since we are working with pixel art here, we want to change that. So for that, I'm going to go up to Project Settings, go over down to where we have, where is it, Rendering Textures, and change the default texture filter from Linear to Nearest. And there we go. It should now be crisp and visible like so. Now let's actually go ahead and test it out to see if it works. So let's go back to our main scene, play this. We can just create a name here, join up with the lobby, and then press Start Game. And there we go. You can see we're now loaded into our game here. So the next step is, of course, going to be creating our players that we can walk around with, jump over the levels. One thing, though, we do want to do first is make sure that this tile map actually has a collider on it, because by default it does not. So what we're going to do is go over to where we have our physics layers and add a new element here. And the collision mask is going to be 1 and 2. The reason why is because we are going to make it so that the players cannot collide with each other, but they all need to be able to collide on the ground. Then what we're going to do is, if we go over to our tile set, we want to go over to Paint and select a property from the editor. We are going to choose our physics layer 0, and this basically then allows us to draw colliders. So we are just going to then basically select every object here that we want to have a collider attached to. Okay, something like that. You can, of course, do the rest if you wish, but I'm just not going to do that for now. So then what we can do is basically in the next lesson, set up our players so that we can jump around and have a bit of a game going on. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be setting up our game manager. Now, the game manager for our little project here all it is going to do is spawn in our player characters. Now, you may be wondering, okay, we've already got our player scene here that we're spawning in for each player, but this is really only there for the lobby to keep track of the player's name and their ID. When we're actually in our game scene here, we are going to be spawning in a player character, and this player character is going to be what we control and jump around with. So we're not going to create the player character now, but rather we're just going to pretend we already have it and then go through the process of spawning it in. So I'm going to select our game node here and I'm going to create a new script on it. And this script right here is going to be called our game manager. Okay. Now, inside of game manager, we are not going to be needing the process function, so we can delete that. We are then going to give it a class name of game manager, and we are then going to create some variables. So first of all, we need a reference to the network node, which we can get by writing down the exact same thing we've done many times over. Network of type network manager equals get node root main network manager. Then we need a variable for our player character scene. Now we're not going to set this just yet because we haven't actually created it yet, so we're going to leave that as blank. We also need another multiplayer spawner node for our player characters, okay? So I'm going to create that here, add child node, multiplayer spawner, and this right here is just going to contain all of the nodes that we are going to spawn in for our game scene, okay? So I'm just going to drag that in like so, there we go. And then let's reference it. So on ready variable, we'll just call this one spawner, and this is going to equal the multiplayer spawner like so. Next, we need to keep track of all of our players. So I'm going to create a variable called current characters equals array, of type array, I mean, and it's going to be equal to an empty array. We also then want to keep track of how many players are currently in the game, because we only want to spawn the characters in once everybody has loaded into the game scene. So here I'm going to go var players in game of type int equals 0. Then down here in the ready function, we're basically going to tick this number up 1 for each player that has joined the game. Okay, so the way we're going to be doing this is by creating a new function down here, and this one is going to be called I'm in game, and it's going to send over the ID of the player that is calling it. Okay, so in here we are just going to go if multiplayer dot is server. So if the server is basically running this function, then we're going to go players in game plus equals 1. We then want to see if every player is in game. So if every player is in game, and we can do that by going if players in game equals the length of network dot current players. Then what we're going to do is we are going to spawn in our players, and for this I'm just going to create a new function over here called spawn players. Okay, and we'll call that right here. There we go. So that is the function right there. Now remember, this is going to be an RPC, so I'm going to add the @RPC tag here. This is going to be any peer. We're then going to have call local, and we are then going to set this to be reliable. Okay, so every time a player joins the game, this is going to be called on the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the ready function and just go I'm in game.rpc and send over our unique ID. So multiplayer.get unique ID. And there we go. And then down here inside of spawn players, let's actually just print out something to see if it works. So here we'll go spawn players. Okay. Let's then press play and see if it works. So we'll launch up into the menu here. Let's just create the lobby. We'll join here. And then if I press start game, you should see it says spawn players in the console, which is great. So how do we go about actually spawning in the players? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to create another function here, and this one is going to be called spawn player character. And this is going to be sending over the player that we want to spawn in, okay? Like so. Now, inside of spawn player character, we're basically just going to create a new character here. Let's just call it char equals player character scene dot instantiate. Okay. And then here we can give the player's name. So char dot name equals player.name. Now remember, the player's name is always going to be their unique ID, so we can also identify a character by its ID. And then we want to go spawner.add child, add the character, and set force readable name to true, as that is just a thing you have to do with multiplayer. And then we'll add it to the current characters array. So we'll go current characters dot append character, and there we go. And then finally, inside of spawn players here, we are going to go through, loop through each of our network's players, and then call this function for each of them. So for here, we're going to go for player in network dot current players, and then we'll just go spawn player character player, and there we go. So that is our game manager script done. Basically, the game manager is in charge of detecting when every player is in game, and when every player has loaded into the game scene, we can then go ahead and spawn each of their characters in. Now, we don't actually have a player character scene yet to spawn in, so that's what we're going to be working on in the next lesson, and I'll see you all then. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be setting up our player character scene. This is going to be the scene that is actually going to be our player character, which we're going to run around and jump with. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and create a brand new scene. So I'm just going to right click on my scenes folder here, go create new scene. Now we're going to go down here and set the scene. We're going to click on this little button here to choose the root node, which is going to be of type character body 2D, and the scene name is going to be player character. Hit OK, and here we are. Now for our player character, we first need to give them a sprite to represent their character. So down inside of our sprites folder, I'm just going to drag one of these in like so. There we go. We can set their position to be 0, 0, so they are nice and centered. I'm just going to rename this to be sprite. We then need to give them a collider. So I'm just going to add a collision shape 2D. I'm just going to make this a circle and bring it down to about that big. Next up, we need 2 nodes. Now these nodes are going to be for syncing the player's inputs and properties. Now we're going to have 2, and I'll explain why in just a second. So I'm going to create a character, a multiplayer synchronizer. I'm then going to duplicate this one actually. The top one I'm going to call character sync, and the bottom one I'm going to call input sync, okay? And let's actually move them above everything here just so it's a bit tidier. Okay, so we have character sync and input sync. Now, the way our player node works is that the player has authority over it, meaning that the player basically owns and controls all of its properties and its replication across the network. Whereas with our player character, we don't want that to happen. Our player character is going to read the inputs from the client and then send those inputs over to the server. So the server will then move the player around and then update their position. So technically the server is going to have authority over the player character, but the player themselves are going to have authority only of the input synchronizer node here. Okay, because we are going to be setting the properties, so we need authority. But for character sync and for the player character, that is going to be owned by the server because they are going to move the player around. So if we click on character sync, there is going to be one property that we want synced across the network, okay? And that is going to be the player's position. When the server moves the player around, we want their position to be updated on all other clients. Now to do this, we're going to select character sync, go down to the replication tab here, and click Add Property to Sync. We're going to select our player character, hit OK, and then we're going to scroll down to where we have Node 2D and set position. Okay, and there we go. So now the position vector is going to be replicated across the network. Input sync, we're going to leave as is for now because we do actually need to go ahead and set up a script for that first. But let's go ahead and create our player character script. So I'm going to create a new script here. This one is of course going to be inside of our scripts folder, and this is going to be called player character. Okay, create that. Now inside of player character, we already have a bunch of code here because we are creating a script on the character body 2D. So what we're going to do for the most part is just modify what we have here already. We're going to set our speed to be 50. we're going to have our jump velocity be minus 150, just because we're working at a bit of a smaller scale. And then we're going to have a constant for gravity, which is going to be equal to 400. Then inside of the physics process function, I'm actually going to rename this to be underscore move, because we are going to be overriding what can and cannot call the process. Add gravity, we're going to do that exactly as we have here, but this time we are instead going to go velocity.y plus equals gravity times delta. For the jump, we can keep this pretty much as is, and then we're going to go down to where we are doing our directional inputs, and we can keep that as is as well, except for, everything should be good here. Okay, so it's fairly simple. We're not really going to be modifying too much with all of this. We are then going to have another function here, and this is going to be our physics process function, okay? So, have the delta. Now, remember what I said about the server moving the player around? This is what we are doing here. We're basically making it so only the server is going to run this move function. So inside a physics process, everybody's going to call it, but we're going to check to see if multiplayer.isServer. And if so, then we call move. Okay, also setting over the delta. So only the server is going to run this movement code. It's going to update its position and then sync that with everybody else on the network. Now, what else we need to do? Well, we need to go ahead and actually assign the multiplayer authority for our input sync, because remember, I said that the input synchronizer node, that is going to be controlled by the local player. So we are going to create the enter tree function. Now remember, enter tree, this gets called even before ready, and this is generally where you want to be setting multiplayer authority. So I'm going to drag in the input sync, and then just go dot set multiplayer authority for the name of this node, which is going to be the player's ID, dot to int, okay? And there we go. We're also going to create a reference to the input, so on ready var input equals the input sync right here. The reason why is because once we actually set up our input script, we need to actually go down here and basically replace all of these inputs with the inputs that have been sent over by the local player, okay? So let's actually go ahead and do that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the input sync node, and I'm going to create a new script on that. And this one is just going to be called player character inputs. So if we go over to our scripts folder, here we can call this one player character inputs, like so, and we can begin filling this out. So inside of the script, we are not going to be needing process. Instead, we're actually going to rename this to be our physics process, as that is what we need instead. We're going to keep ready, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create two variables. First one, it's going to be an exported variable, because remember, if we want to replicate a variable, we need to export it. It's variable move input of type float, and then a one for our jump input of type boolean. Now, inside of ready, what we want to do is basically make it so that the physics process function does not run if we do not have authority, okay? So the only person who is going to run physics process is going to be the player who has authority over this node. So for this, we can go if get multiplayer authority, and this returns the ID, does not equal multiplayer dot get unique ID. Oops, dot get unique ID. Then we are going to go set physics process to be false, okay? So you can basically enable and disable the process and physics process functions in this way. So essentially, at the start of the game, if we do not have authority over the input sync, then that means we are not going to run physics process. Only the local player for this player character can run it. And inside of here, we are essentially just going to go move input equals input.get axis, and this is just going to be UI underscore left and UI underscore right. Okay, we're basically doing the same thing here as we are doing in our player character script. And then for jump input, this is going to be input.isAction pressed for the UI accept, which is going to be, I believe, the spacebar. Okay, and that's all we need to do for this script. Now, as a bit of a challenge, I want you to go ahead and make it so that we can actually sync the move input and jump input variables in the input sync node here. Now you may notice that if we go to the replication tab, it's kind of copying over the player character variable. That is a bit of a bug, so if you're still encountering that, simply just delete input sync and recreate that node right here. So multiplayer synchronizer, call this input sync, move it back up here, and then you should be able to see now they differentiate from one another, okay? So input sync, I want you to replicate the move input and jump input variables. Okay, so I hope you had a go at that challenge. Pretty much what we want to do is select the input sync node, down in replication, click add property to sync, select our input sync node here, hit OK, and you should see that we don't, oh, I forgot, since I deleted and recreated the node, I need to reattach that script here. So we'll just reattach the player inputs there, okay. And now if we go ahead and do that again, input sync, okay, you should see at the top we have move input and jump input. So we just want to go ahead and sync each of those right here, like so. Now, the next step is finally going to our game manager and connecting our player character scene to be equal to, so preload, and we want to go to the player character right here. Okay, and then what we need to do is make sure that when we are spawning this player character in and adding it as a child to the spawner, that we actually can do that. Because if we go to our main scene, you remember we have our multiplayer spawner, and this has the auto spawn list, which basically defines all the scenes that can be replicated across the network. Well, if we go back to our game script right here, and we select our multiplayer spawner, you can see the auto spawn list is currently empty. So we need to basically connect this up to our player character scene here. There we go. And then what we need to do is basically set it up so that the inputs are actually going to be fed into our player character. So remember, our player character input script has a move input and a jump input. And our character input script, our player character script, it needs to then be able to read those. So we've already got the input right here. Down here inside of the move function, we are going to replace this handle jump with input.jump input. And then down here for the direction, this is just going to be equal to input.move input. Okay. And that is all we need to do. So now we can save that, press play, and see if it works. So we'll join this as the server and this as the client. We are then going to click on start game. As you can see, both players spawn in and we can then move around respectively, okay? Just like that. So, of course, now you can go ahead, connect this up to whatever game you've already created, or if you want to expand upon this little simple platformer, then you can, of course, do that as well. So, hope you have fun with experimenting with this, and I hope you enjoyed looking at how we can actually create a lobby inside of Godot using multiplayer.